Shabbat Shalom. I can see you all populating, but there's a big screen of just my face in front of me. So I can see that there are some of you here, but I can't say who yet. But Shabbat Shalom. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, Rick. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Susan Lemley. Shabbat Shalom to the Bacharachs. Shabbat Shalom to the Brayers. So lovely to see you. It's been a while. Shabbat Shalom to Ed. Shabbat Shalom to the Hermans. Shabbat Shalom to Rebecca. Shabbat Shalom to Stan. Shabbat Shalom to Cheyenne. Shabbat Shalom to Joanna and to Annette, who's connecting to her audio. It is lovely to see you all, and those who are joining us with your faces, it will be lovely to see you in a moment. Just give me 1 second. Shabbat Shalom to Tzvi and to Henry. Sorry, Tzvi, I lingered on you for a second because I was waiting for other faces. Shabbat Shalom to Carl Sunshine. Shabbat Shalom to my grandparents. Okay, we're going to begin. Shabbat Shalom to Irving. I have to say Shabbat Shalom to Irving. We're going to begin on page 103. If you're able to do so, please rise. Page 103, page 65, or page 10. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher nata sechvi min alevchi min yom uvein laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani betzamo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvur. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael betifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten layayev koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir sheina menai. Utnuma me'af apai, v'ratzah b'fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lo yateinu shtigal yamei torecha. Utenenu hayom v'chol yom, lechenu chesed rachamim beinecha v'nekorim v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai, gomel chasadim tovim le'amo Yisrael. Page 172 or page 32. Mizmor shir le'yom HaShabbat. Magalu masech Adonai kumach shavotecha yishpa lo yada. Odienu v'en b'seva desheinim v'rananim iyu lehagid ki hashar Adonai tzuri velo avalatabo. Page 120, page 81, or page 50. Mizmor shir chanukat habayit leDavid. Eilecha Adonai ekra, vel Adonai et Hanan Eilecha Adonai Ekra Vel Adonai et Hanan Shema Adonai Vechoneni Adonai Ozer li Shema Adonai Vechoneni Adonai Ozer li Leman Yisamecha Chavav Lo Yidom Adonai Elohai Leolam Odeka. Mourner's Kaddish, page 121, page 82, or page 52. Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei Rabba be'alma divra chirte v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Israel ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen yehei shemei Rabba mevorach leolam lomei almaya Yit barach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh ve'yit hadar ve'yit aleh ve'yit halal shemei dekudesha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya ve'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Shabbat shalom to the Abels family and to the Selk family and to Howard. I think I said Shabbat shalom to everybody else, but Shabbat shalom to anyone who has joined us since the beginning of the service. We are at the beginning of Psukei de Zimra on page 122, or page 83, or page 54. Baruch Shemar ve'aya ha'olam, Baruch Hu, Baruch HaSever Shi, Baruch HaMever Se, Baruch HaZem Koyim, Baruch Merchem Al Haaretz. Yachid Chayolami, Melech Meshubach Vardei Shemo Gadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal Bat Yishpachot. Page 126, page 86, or page 58 in the middle of the page. Hoshia et amecha, uvarech en achlatecha, urem, 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 urem v'nasem, rem v'nasem ad ha'olam. Hoshia et amecha, uvarech en achlatecha, urem, 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 urem v'nasem, rem v'nasem ad ha'olam. ואני בחסדך בטחתי, הגל ליבי וישועתך, אשיר על אדוני, כי גמל עלי. Page 128, page 88, or page 62. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Matt Shapiro. לדוד בשנתו אתמול לפני אבי מלך וגרשו וילך ויברך אדוני. גדלו לאדוני יתירו ממש שמו יחדיו דרשתי אדוני. מי האיש החפץ חיים אוהב ימים לראות טוב נצור לשונך מהרה ושפתיך מדבר מרמה סור מרע ועשה טוב בקש שלום ורודפהו עיני אדוני הצדיקים ועזב ושבתם בני אדוני. Pohodeh Adonai nefesh avadav, velo yashmu kol hachosim bo. If you're able to do so, please rise. Page 132, page 92, or page 72. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Elohei Elohim ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Adonai Adonai. Shebeshifleinu zachar lanu ki le'olam chasto vayifrekeinu mitzareinu ki le'olam chasto noten lechem lechol basar ki le'olam chasto hodu le'el hashamayim ki le'olam chasto. You may be seated. Ranu tzadikim Adonai sharon avatela hodu l'Adonai b'chinar v'nevach. Nahav shiri chadal zuri magnenu ki voismach libenu ki v'shem kol shavatachnu yichatztecha Adonai aleinu kasher yichanu lach mizmor shir leyom haShabbat tov l'Adonai Adonai zamer shimcha elyon legi b'bach chasecha v'emunach alad Magalu masechaya meod ameku machshevotecha Magalu masechaya meod ameku machshevotecha yishbar lo yadav chasil lo yavinet. Od yanu v'meseva deshanim v'ranim yu liagi ki Adonai tzuri v'lo avlatavo Adonai malach ki ulavesh lavesh Adonai oz hitazar avtikon tevamati eidotecha nemnu meod levetcha nava kodesh Adonai leorech yamim yanananai yanananai yananai 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 yanananai yananai yanananai yanananai Ashrei can be found on page 136, page 96, or page 81. Ashrei yoshevetecha od yalucha sela Hashem shekacha lo Hashem shavnei lahavtilan. פותח את ידיך ומסביר לכל הרצון, ותגדנה בכל דרך וחסי בכל מעשה. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברך מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה, הללויה, הלי נפשי את אדוני, הללה אדוני בחיי. אדוני שומר קירים, יתום ואלמנה יודד, ודרך רשעים יהווה, תמלוך אדוני לעולם לא יסיל לדור ודור. הללויה, הללויה, כי טוב זמרה אלוהינו, כי נעים נבעתי לאבוני שלהם, אדוני נדחי ישראל חנס. הרופא לשבורי לב ומחבש לעצבותם, בני מישראל חכבים ויוכלו משמעותי קראי. מה הגיד דבריו ליעקב, הוא קו משפטיו לישראל, לא עשה כן לכל גוי, ומשפטים בידע הללויה, 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 Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Adonai min hashamayim, Hallelujah, b'meromim, Hallelujah, chomel hachav, Hallelujah, kotzevaav, Hallelujah, shemesh ve'yareach, Hallelujah, kol koch ve'or, Hallelujah, shemei hashamayim, והמים אשר מעל השמיים יהללו את שם אדוני כי הוא ציווה ונבראו ויעמידם ליד לעולם חוק נתן ולא יעבור יהללו את שם אדוני כי הוא ציווה ונבראו ויעמידם ליד לעולם חוק נתן ולא יעבור. הללויה, 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 הללויה. Hallelujah. והירם קרא לעמו, תהילה לכל חסידיו, לבני ישראל עם קרובו, הללויה, הללויה, שיר לאדוני שיר חדש, תהילתו בכל חסידים, ישמח לשמוע. לאסור מכם בזיקים ונכבדיכם בחבלי ברזל, לעשות בהם משפט כתוב, הדרו לכל חסידיו, הללויה, הללויה, הלו אל בקודשו, הלו ברכיהו זו, הלו בגבורתיו, הלו בקרב גדולו. כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללויה, הללויה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללויה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללויה. ברוך אדוני לעולם, אמן ואמן, ברוך אדוני מציון שוכן שלהם. וימלך כבודו כל הארץ, אמן ואמן. If you're able to do so, please rise. ויברך דוד את אדוני לעיני כל היום, דוד ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהי ישראל וידבר. לך אדוני אלוהי ותקבע. Tahu Adonai Elohim, asher b'chat Avraham, v'etzeto me'or kasdim, v'samta shamor Avraham, u'matzat et levavo, ne'eman lefanecha, v'charoti mo brita tzedek. והים בקעת לפניהם, ויעברו בתוכם בבשה, ורפאם השתחתו בצולות, כמו אבן במים עזים. We're now on page 143, page 102, or page 92. ויושל אדוני ביום ההוא את ישראל מיד מצרים, וירש את מצרים מאת הסוד. ויאמינו באדוני ובמשה עבדו, אז ישיר משה אשר לרק יוגה, סוס ורחבו, רמה בים. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, כי לאדוני מלך משה באלוהים, ואלו משיעים בארץ ולשפט את ארציו, והייתה לאדוני המלוכה, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. You may be seated. נשמת כל החי, תברך את שמך, אדוני אלוהינו. נשמת כל חי, תברך את שמך, אדוני אלוהינו. ינאי יאי ברוך הבשרת וראתם רם זכרך ומכינו תמיד. נהלכך נשבחך נברכך נברך את שמך כמו לדוד. ברכי נפשי את אדוני וכל קרבי את שם קודשו. האל בתעצומות עוזך, הקדוש בכבוד שמך, הגיבור לנצח ונורא בנורותיך, המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונישא. In a moment, we are going to begin Shacharit on page 147 or page 105 or page 336. For all of Psukei de Zimra, I've been wondering whether or not to share this news with this community, because I don't want it to cloud your Shabbat or ruin your Shabbat in any way. And there is something about entering Shacharit that needs for us to be fully present, and I cannot be fully present without sharing this news with all of you. Rabbi Klickfeld at the beginning of services came in to share with me that unfortunately Judy Weinstock passed away yesterday. Many of you know Judy from her just wonderful personality, from her amazing family. She's been struggling and battling cancer for not too long, but long enough that she's been suffering for a while. And I know Judy as the mother of friends of mine, and it is with quite a heavy heart that I share this news. But I wanted you all to know, so that as we enter into Shacharit, we're all present and able to be thinking about her in this moment. Rabbi Klickfeld told me to share that the funeral will either be tomorrow or Monday, so feel free to be paying attention to your emails for that news. And I know many of us have experienced loss here with us this morning. Parents, loss of parents, loss of siblings, loss of grandparents, loss of spouses. And that is what the Weinstock family is dealing with this morning and yesterday evening. So I wanted us to be able to think of her and think of the family as we go into Shacharit. And again, this is not news that I share to ruin your Shabbat, but rather to allow us to send our hearts and our energy towards the whole family. And we will miss her greatly. Page 147, page 105, or page 336. שוכן עד מהרום וקדוש שמו וכתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני לשרים נאווה תהילה. בפי ישרים תתהלל ובדברי צדיקים תתברך ובלשון חסידים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ובמקלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל ברנאי דבר שמך מלכנו בכל דבר דורש. להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפאר, רומם, להדל, לברך, להלל, לקלס, על כל דברי שירו ותשבחות. דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך. If you're able to do so, please rise. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים וארץ, כי לך נאה אדוני. ברכות והודות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אל חי העולמים. We turn now to the prayer following the Baruch Hu on page 150, page 107, or page 340. You may be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer v'rechosech oseh shalom uvarei et hakol hakol yaducha v'kol yishbechucha v'chaim. אין כערכך, אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי עולם הבא. אפס בלתך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך, מושיענו לתחיית המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים. ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה גודלו וטובו מלא עולם. דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו. המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר בכבוד על המרכבה. זכות ומישור לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו. טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו, יצרם בדעת, בבינה ובהשכל, כוח וגבורה נתן בהם, להיות מושלים בקרב תבל. מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה, נאה זיום בכל העולם. שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בהמה רצון קונם. פאר וכבוד נותנים לו לשמו, צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו. קרא לשמש ויזרח אור, ראה והתקין צורת הלבנה. שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום, תפארת וגדולה, שרפים ויופנים וחיות הקודש. ליל אשר שבת מכל המעשים ביום השביעית אליי ושבת. תתברך מושיענו השבח מעשה ידיך, ועל מאורי אור שעשית יפרוך הסלע. תתברך צורנו מלכנו וגואלנו בורא קדושים, ישתבח שמך מלכנו. כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים בהמה וביראה רצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה וזמרה, מברכים ומשבחים, ומפארים ומעריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל המלך הגדול יתברך הקדוש, וכולם מקבלים המלך. כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך לארץ כבודו ובנים וחיות. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו לברך נמות תיתן למלך החי וקיים. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות, אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו חמלה גדולה. לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמוע ולעשות כל יום הקודם ותמות תורתך והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו כי אל פועל ישועות אתה ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר במו ישראל באהבה אל מלך נאמן שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת ויציב ונכון וקיים ושלם וחביב לדור והדור הוא קיים ושמו קיים וחיסון נכון ומלכותו ומנותו ליד קיימת רב חיים וקיימים נענים אחדים אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו מצילנו מעם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם מגן ומושיע לבניהם אחריהם בכל דור ודור ברמות תהילה לעליון ברוך ומבורך משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלה שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך le'olam va'ed. Yanai nanai yanai nai yanai nanai nai yanai nai nai tzur Yisrael kuma bezrat Yisrael uftechinu mecha Yehuda veYisrael go aleinu Adonai tzvaot shemo kedosh Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai gal Yisrael. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We will be reading this week's Parsha, Tazria Metzora. This is a Parsha that basically people try to not have to talk about, to talk about anything else but Tazria Metzora. My first library minyan drush I ever gave was on Tazria Metzora. I don't know if that was a test or if that was just because no one else wanted to talk about Tazria Metzora. I'll never know. But it gave me a newfound love for this Parsha because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to talk about, to not talk about all the things that no one wants to hear you talking about. So it is a very interesting Parsha, to say the least. Because of the triennial that we are in, we actually are reading part of Tazria and part of Metzora. So we're not reading all of one or all of the other, but you'll get a little taste of both. So this is the bat mitzvah of Jennifer Lowe. And again, if you think that rabbis don't want to talk about Tazria Metzora, when you find out that you have a bar or bat mitzvah on Tazria Metzora, you really don't know what to do because you're 12 and don't want to talk about oozing parts of your body. So Jennifer Lowe now, many years post her bat mitzvah, though not too many. Will read Torah for us so she can be unmuted and spotlit. If you are following on in the Eitz Chaim, it's on page 657. If you're in any Bible, it is Leviticus chapter 13, starting with verse 40. Jennifer, where'd you go?
I'm here.
Oh, I can't see you.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you, which is bizarre.
I can see me.
Good.
So I just, because it's my anniversary many years ago, I want to say a couple things. One is that I remember when Rabbi Schatz gave that drush, and I still remember what she talked about. And if you listen to my short vort after Shabbat, of course, what you'll hear is that I'm not sure my mother knew what the portion was. I was the first girl to be able to read Torah at our synagogue in 1973. And so years later, I thought about the fact that they didn't make me do Devar Torah. They said, it's so hard for a girl. It's so hard for a girl to read Torah. We can't burden her with the Devar Torah. But later I figured out that Rabbi David Schneer and Rabbi Marty Levin, Alava Shalom, probably could not agree on who would be the one to work with me on the drush. And that's why. I want to say one other thing is that I wouldn't be here doing this, but for not only my mother, a great activist, and certainly women before her, women who have come now. And I have to say that when I had my bat mitzvah, there were no women rabbis. So I'm so excited that, I'm sharing the spotlight with a young woman rabbi, much younger than me. And then, so that's it. So I'm ready.
Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Ve'ish ki yimaret rosho kareahu tahorhu ve'im mip'ei panav yimaret rosho gibeahu tahorhu v'hiyeh Vekarchat o vegabachat negalavan adam dam tzaraat parachat hi bikarachto o vegavachto varaoto hakohen vihine zeitan negalavana adam demet bekarachto o vegavachto kimar e tzaraat ho basar ish zarua Hu tamehu tameh tamenu hakohen barosho nigo v'hatzaru asher bo hanega bigadav yihiyu perumim barosho yihiyeh farua v'yal shafan yate v'tameh tameh yikra kol yemei asher hanega bo yitma tamehu badad yeshev michutz l'machane moshavo. I also need different glasses, apparently.
You're doing great.
That's the age thing. V'habeged ki yavo negatzarat beveged zemer o beveged pishtim o vashti o va'erev lapishtim ve'latzamer o va'or o v'chol melechet or v'haya hanega yirak rak o adam dam babeged ova or ovashti over erev o b'chol kli or negat tzaratu v'hara et hakohen v'ra'a hakohen et hanaga v'hiskir et hanega shivat yamim v'ra'a et hanega bayom hashvi Kifasa hanega babeged ovashti over erev over or lechol asher yaseh haor lemilacha tzarat mim eret hanega tamehu v'sarav et habeged o et hashti o et ha'erev Batzemer o papishtim o ekol kli haor asher yavo hanaga kitzarat mam eret hi ba'esh tisaref v'im yireh hakohen v'hine lo fasa hanega ba'beged o vashti o va'erev O b'chol kli or v'tziva hakohen v'chivesu et asher bo hanaga v'hisgiro shivat yamim shenit v'ra'a hakohen acharei hukabes et hanega v'hine lo hafach hanega et eino v'hanega lo fasha Fasat tamehu ba'esh tisrefenu pecheteti bekarachto uvagabachto ve'im ra'ah kohen ve'hine kecha hanega acharehu kabe soto ve'kara oto min ha'beged o min ha'or o min ha'sh O min hashti o min ha'erev v'im tera'eh o babeged o hashti o va'erev o b'chol kli or parachat hi ba'esh tisrefenu et asher bo hanaga v'habeged o hashti o ha'erev O kol kli haor asher tichabes v'sar mehem hanaga v'chuba shenit v'taher zo torat negatzarad beged hatzemer o hapishtim o hashti o ha'erev o kol kli or Letaharo o letamo.
We're now going to turn to the fourth aliyah, which is the beginning of Parshat Metzora. So chapter 14 of Leviticus, verse 1.
Okay, and after this, you'll do blessing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, zot tihiyeh Torah ha'metzora beyom taharato. V'huva el hakohen, v'yatsa hakohen el michutz l'machane, v'ra'a hakohen v'hine nirpa nega hatzarat min hatzarua, v'tziva hakohen v'lakach l'mitaher, shtei tziporim hayot teharot, V'etz erez ushni tola'at ve'ezov. V'tziva hakohen v'shachat et hatzipur ha'echat el kli cheres amayim chayim.
Yasha koach, Jennifer. I just want to point out to everybody that one of the interesting pieces of Tazria Metzora is that we often think of it as gross, or we think of it as oozing body parts. Even I said that earlier today. But really, we're talking about an infection that affected every single part of people's lives. So it affected their clothing, it affected their homes, it affected their bodies. But we get stuck on kind of the gross medical parts of it, of the Parsha. We don't often think about the fact that this was something that was all-consuming. And I'm sure rabbis everywhere, both this year and last, have made the connection to COVID, because it isn't just something that affects the person who actually has, in this case, COVID or tzara'at, but really all of the surroundings, that which the person is availing themselves of, right? That which the community that they're in, the things that they touch, the ways in which they are putting themselves in situations with others. So it is interesting. The part that Jennifer just read is much more about the stuff and less about the oozing body parts, which is at the beginning of Tazria. So I just wanted to point that out because I think it's something that we get stuck in the parts that we don't want to talk about because we, the rabbis, are not doctors, and so questions that might arise about these different body parts, we don't really know. Stay tuned for my drash later, because that's what it's about. But also the fact that it is interesting, right? We can think about how our bodies might be affected by something and have a reaction to that something, but we never really think about how our homes are affected, the people around us are affected, the clothing we wear is affected. So I just wanted to bring that up, and if you would like to read back over what Jennifer just read in the English, you'll see that it is mentioned there in quite a lot of detail. So we're going to pause now for a Misha Berach. Again, I'll read a list of names of those who are ill in our community. And then I'll pause and allow you to recite names in your own homes. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak veYaakov ve'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel veLeah hu yivarech v'yirapeh et Zahava Yafa bat Esther vet Rivka bat Pesha vet Leah Friedel bat Bracha Kreindel vet Catherine bat Sarah vet Stanley Greitzer vet Harav Yaakov Baruch ben Uri v'Chava vet Yosef Menachem Mendel ben Gittel vet Yehuda ben Avram v'Sara vet Friedel bat Rachel vet Metuka Sarah bat Shena Golda vet Bela Esther Gittel bat Fega vet Ben Zion ben Gittel vet Eliyahu ben Shena Shira vet Yelena Kramer vet Aharon Avram ben Adina vet Rivka bat Nechama vet Hillel ben Yaakov vet Cyril Chana bat Sivia vet Risa Chana bat Chasya Gehula vet Avraham Simcha ben Avram vet Sarah Cyril bat Miriam vet Menachem ben Lili vet Natan David ben Baruch vet Mina vet Ruth Freda bat Miriel vet Yehuda Israel ben Leah vet Shalomit bat Miriam vet Yudit bat Shulamit vet Mordechai ben Esther, vet Yudit Liba bat Fega, vet Chaim ben Sarah Leah, vet Mariam bat Angelica, vet Maria Teresa Estrada, vet Yosef Alilach bat Miriam, vet Michael Coenso, vet Penina Drebin, vet Hannah bat Roshia, vet David Folman, vet Rivka Chana bat Sipora, vet Lucy Leah bat Dora, vet Chana bat Brina, vet Luz bat Sarah, vet Paula Zombra, vet Pinchas ben Eliza, vet Penina bat Bluma, vet Yaakov ben Yocheved, vet Yehudit bat Rivka, vet Danny ben Yamin ben Tova Nurit, vet Gershon ben Chaim vet Diverta. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimaleh Rechamim Alehem Lechazikam L'Rafotam V'Yishlach Lehem Me'ara Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Betoch Shar HaCholim V'Chazek Et Yedei Oskim B'Tzorcheihem Shabbat Yimim Lizoku Refuah Krova Levo Hashtabach Elav Bizman Kariv V'Nomar Amen. This is the second week in a row, unfortunately, that last week I said Lou Miller's name without knowing that he had passed away, and this week I purposefully omitted Judy Weinstock's name from our list. And I'm struck every week by part of our Misha Berach that says, Chazek et idei ha'oskim besorchehem. That not only is this Misha Berach for those who are in need of healing for their bodies, but also for those who are taking care of their bodies. And on this list is Judy Miller in her own right, and as well as Alan Weinstock and the Weinstock family, though thank God they are healthy. These are people for whom, and Helen, who is on our Zoom with us this morning, these are people for whom they need the strength of this Misha Berach, as well as those who lost a battle to an ailing body. So I hope that we as a community have the strength and the ability to show them this chizuk, this strength, because they were the ones who were oskim betzorchehem, who were busy in taking care of the needs of their loved ones, who no longer walk this earth. And so though we don't say Misha Berach for them, we do say a Misha Berach for those who cared for them. We'll continue now with the fifth aliyah, also page 661, but chapter 14, verse 6. Jennifer, are you unmuted still?
Now I am.
Okay, great.
They were afraid I might,
Always. We're always afraid.
I know. With me, I can understand. Okay. Et hatzipur hachaya yikach ota v'et eitza erez v'et shni hatolat v'et ha'ezov v'taval otam v'et hatzipur hachaya bedam hatzipur hashchuta al hamayim hachayim v'hiza al hamitaher min hatzara'at sheva pamim v'ti haro v'shilach et hatzipur hachaya al panei hasadeh v'chibes hamitaher et begadav v'galach et kosaro v'rachatz b'mayim v'taher v'achad yavo el hamachaneh v'yashav michutz lahalo shivat yamim v'haya bayom hashvi'i yigalach et kosaro et rosho v'yitzekano v'et kabot einav v'et kosaro yigaleach v'chibes v'gadav v'rachatz episaro b'mayim v'taher uvayom hashmini yikach shnei kvasim timimim v'chavsa achat bat shenata timima ushlosha esronim solet mincha belulav hashemen v'lo ge'echad shamen v'he'emid hakohen hamitaher et ha'ish hamitaher ve'otam lifnei Adonai petach ohel moed lakach hakohen et hakeves ha'echad v'hikrivoto la'asham v'etlog hashamen v'henifotam tinufa lifnei Adonai.
Verse 13.
V'shachat et hakeves bimkom asher yishchat et hachatat v'yatala bimkom hakodesh ki kachatat hasham hu lakohen kodesh kodeshim hu v'lakach hakohen midam hasham Benatan hakohen al tenuch ozen hamitaher hayimanit v'albochen yado hayimanit v'albochen raglo hayimanit v'lakach hakohen milog hashamen v'yatzach al kaf hakohen hasmalit v'taval hakohen et etzba'o hayimanit min hashemen asher al kapo hasmalit V'hiza min Hashemen be'etzba'o sheva pamim lifnei Adonai umiyeter Hashemen asher al kapo yiten hakohen al tenuch ozen hamitaher hayimanit v'albochen yado hayimanit v'albochen raglo hayimanit al dam hasham v'hanotar b'shemen asher al kaf hakohen yiten al rosh hamitaher v'chiper alav hakohen lifnei Adonai v'yasa hakohen et hachatat v'chiper al hamitaher mitumato v'achar yishchat et ha'olah v'ha'elah hakohen et ha'olah v'et ha'olah v'etamincha et ha'olah v'etamincha hamizbecha v'chiper alav hakohen v'taher.
Verse 21, page 662.
V'imdalhu ein yado maseget v'lakach keves echad asham l'tunufa l'chaper alav v'saron solet echad v'lu b'shemen l'mincha v'lo shamen u'shtei torim o shnei b'nei yonah asher tasig yado v'haya echad chatat v'ha'echad olah v'hevi otam bayom hashmini l'tarato el hakohen el petacho hamoed lifnei Adonai v'lakach hakohen et hakeves ha'asham v'et lo kashamen v'henif otah hakohen tinufa lifnei Adonai v'shachat et kevetz ha'asham v'lakach hakohen midam ha'asham v'natan al tenuch ozen hamitaher hayimanit v'albochen yado hayimanit v'albochen raglo hayimanit umin hashemen yitzok hakohen akaf hakohen hasmalit v'hiza hakohen be'etzba'o hayimanit min hashemen asher akapo hasmalit sheva pa'amim lifnei Adonai v'natan hakohen min hashemen asher akapo al tenuch ozen hamitaher hayimanit v'albochen yado hayimanit v'albochen raglo hayimanit al makom dam hasham v'hanotar min hashemen asher al kaf hakohen yiten al rosh hamitaher lechaper alav lifnei Adonai v'yasa et echad min hatorim o min b'nei hayonah me'asher tasig yado et asher tasig yado et hachad hatat v'et hachad olah al hamincha v'chiper hakohen al hamitaher lifnei Adonai zot Torah asher bo negat zara'at asher lo tasig yado betarato.
Yasher koach. I feel like we should be throwing candy at you. We are going to be reading. Jennifer is just going to stay on. She's doing actually her bat mitzvah again. This is her bat mitzvah all over again.
There were 12. There were 12. There were 12 pesukim for my bat mitzvah. So I've grown.
Yeah, there's a few more than 12. I think there was 12 in one aliyah. Okay, so the Haftorah can be found in 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3 through 20. If you're in an Eitz Chaim, it's on page 676. I'm still here, but I'm just going to sit down while Jennifer's reading. So again, page 676, 2 Kings chapter 7.
Ve'arba'a anashim hayu mitzoraim petach hashar vayomru ish arehu ma anachnu yoshvim po admatnu im amarnu navo ha'ir v'hara'av ba'ir v'amadnu sham V'im yashavnu fo v'amadnu ve'ata לכו ונלפה אל מחנה ארם, אם יחניונו נהיה, ואם ימיתונו ועמדנו. ויקומו ונשף לבוא אל המחנה ארם, ויבואו עד קצה מחנה ארם, והנה אין שם איש. ואדוני השמיע את מחנה ארם, כל רכב, כל סוס, כל חיל גדול, ויאמרו איש אל אחיו, הנה שחר עלינו מלך ישראל, את מלכי החיתים, ואת מלכי מצרים לבוא אלינו. ויקומו וינוסו ונשף ויעזבו את העליהם ואת סוסיהם ואת המוריהם המחנה כאשר היא, וינוסו על נפשם. ויבואו המצורעים האלה עד קצה המחנה, ויבואו אל אוכל אחד ויאכלו וישתו משם כסף וזהב וכרדים, וילכו ויטמינו וישובו, ויבואו אל אוהל אחר, וייסעו משם, וילכו ויטמינו. ויאמרו איש אל רעהו, לא כן אנחנו עושים. היום הזה יום בשורה הוא, ואנחנו מחשים, והקינו עד אור הבוקר ומצאנו עוון, ועתה לכו ונבואה ונגידה בית המלך, ויבואו ויגרו אל סוהר העיר, ויגידו לכם לאמור, באנו אל מחנה ארם, והנה אין שם איש וכל אדם, כי הסוס אסור והחמור אסור, ואוהלים כאשר המה. ויקרא השוערים, ויגידו בית המלך פנימה, ויקם המלך לילה, ויאמר אל עבדיו, אגידה נא לכם את אשר עשו לנו ארם, ידעו קרבים אנחנו, ויצאו מן המחנה להיחווה בשדה לאמור, כי יצאו מן העיר ונתפסם חיים, ואל העיר נבוא. ויען אחד מעבדיו ויאמר, ויקחו נא 5 מן הסוסים הנסערים אשר נשארו בחינם, ככל המון ישראל אשר נשארו בחינם, ככל המון ישראל אשר תמו, ונשלחה ונראה. ויקחו 2 רכב סוסים, וישלח המלך אחרי מחנה ארם, לאמור לכו וראו, והלכו אחריכם עד הירדן, והנה Kol haderech mele'a v'gadim v'chelim asher hishlichu aram b'chavzam vayashuvu hamalachim vayagidu lamelech vayetzei ha'am vayavozu et machane aram Vayhi sa'asolet b'shekel v'satayim sorim b'shekel kidvar Adonai v'hamelech hivkid et hashalish asher nishan al yado al hasha'ar Vayamasuhu ha'am bashar vayamot kasher diber ish Elohim asher diber beredet hamelech elav Vayihi kidaber ish Elohim el hamelech lemor Satayim zorim b'shekel, us asalet b'shekel, yihye ka'ed machar b'sha'ar shomron. Vayan hashalish et ish Elohim, vayomar, v'hinei Adonai, oseh arubot b'shamayim, Hayya kadavar hazeh vayomer hincha ro'eh be'enecha umisham lo tochel vayhi lo ken v'yimsu oto ha'am bashar vayamot.
Yasher Koach, Jennifer, I have a blessing for you. Because you deserve a blessing after all of that reading, but also on the anniversary of your bat mitzvah. What's your Hebrew name?
Tova bat Tuvia Bitsapora.
Tova bat Tuvia Bitsapora. Okay. Mi sheberach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov imotenu Sarah Rivka Recha v'Leah hu yivarech et
Tova bat Tuvia
Bitsipora, שהגיעה למצווה ועלתה היום לכבוד המקום לכבוד התורה ולכבוד שבת, הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמר ויחיה ויכונן את ליבה להיות שלם עם כל אלוהיה להגות בתורתו, ללכת בדרכיו ולשמור מצוותיו, להיות אמיצה למצוא את יהודה ולהיות אישה אוהבת ואהובה ותנאה היום ובכל יום לחנוך עשר רחמים בעיניך וכל רואיה ושלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיה ונאמר Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless Jennifer Lowe, who has been called to the Torah, who has really signed up to read the Torah, upon reaching this age with reverence for Torah, for God, and for Shabbat. May the Holy One protect and sustain her, helping you to be wholehearted in your faith, to study Torah, and to fulfill mitzvot, and to walk in God's ways. May you have strength to find your calling, to continue to be a person who is loving and beloved, and may you find love and compassion today and every day, in your eyes, in God's eyes, and in the eyes of all who see you. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you.
And Jennifer, I'll just give you a blessing from my own words. You are someone who gives to this community in so many ways, not only through your Torah reading, through your Haftorah reading, but by leading our ritual committee, by being someone who is committed to the library minyan, by being someone who just is interested in making everything that you do better. And I see nodding heads, so I know that I'm not the only one who feels this way, and it is a blessing to get to work with you and to get to hear you read Torah and to have you as a member of this holy community. And I only hope that we're able to continue creating holy space together with your help and with your guidance, and also with your impeccable need to make sure that things are exactly as they should be and not stopping until they get there. So thank you for pushing us, and thank you for being part of this community to allow us to do that.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. We're going to now do a prayer for our country on page 177 or page 148 or page 414. Let me just get there. Okay. Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessings upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials, who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Adonai, God, whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me, and let us say, Amen. A prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo, Barech Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha be'evrat chasdecha, Ufros aleha sukat shlomecha, Ushlach orcha v'amitcha l'rasheha sareha ve'yotzeha, V'taknem beitzat tova milfanecha, Chazek yedidei migne eretz kodshenu, V'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, V'ateret nitzachon te'atrem, V'natata shalom ba'aretz, V'simchat olam leyoshveha, V'nomar Amen. We will continue now with Ashrei on page 181, page 151, or page 420. And if you are standing, you may be seated. Ashrei Ashrei v'techa od yalucha sela Hashem shekach lo Hashem shadonai lo havti la davim. פותח את ידיך ומסביר לך רצון צדיק נמך. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, 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 hallelujah. Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. It is really wonderful to be with you all this morning. We're going to do a little study around Ta'azriya Metzora, and I gave you a little hint into this earlier. But one of the pieces of Ta'azriya Metzora that's always been quite interesting to me is the fact that a priest is used as the doctor. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the fact that I can watch doctor shows on TV, and I can call my aunts and uncles who are doctors and ask them to explain things to me that I will never understand. But if any of you came to me and said, you know, I have this thing on my arm and I'm wondering what it is, just because I've watched medical television that is fake or listened to stories from my aunts and uncles who are doctors does not mean that I'm a doctor. And I know that. But for some reason, our Torah is allowing a priest to go about and make all of these decisions around a disease that I don't think he learned in priest school. Priest school. That's very fun. I've never heard that before. That is very funny. I have never heard of, a priest learning how to be a doctor. I definitely did not learn how to be a doctor in rabbinical school. And it's always interesting to me when people of high leadership take on roles that they don't actually have any skill in. They take on roles because the people who are in their, let's just call it parish or community or government, believe that they have authority because they're the head of the totem pole, but they might not actually have skills in the area for the question that they're being asked. And now the Torah, I don't think, makes mistakes. So if the Torah decided, if God decided, if rabbis decided that the priest was going to be the one to make these decisions about a medical issue, then I have to imagine that they did have skill in that area, or at least they had some amount of knowledge that could help them bring answers, comfort, what have you, support to the people who are asking them the questions about this tzara'at, this disease that in modern day we call leprosy. So we're going to look at a few different commentaries on this idea of the priest becoming doctor. And what I want to say to those of you who are doctors is I don't think this takes away from the fact that doctors existed during that time. I think that it is intentional that the priest was the person who had to look over this tzara'at, or be the one to bring them back into the community. I don't believe that the Torah was just deciding that the priest was more powerful than the doctor, or that doctors weren't good enough. I do believe that there were two different roles, and for some reason, which makes it even maybe more interesting, for some reason the priest was chosen, not the doctor. So we're going to read a little bit. I know that for some reason the Google Doc had some issues for some of you, so I'm hoping that that was fixed once we recognize the issue and that you're able to read along. If you don't have the source sheet in front of you, it's fine. I will be reading out the commentaries that I go through, and we're going to be reading from the Torah in Leviticus chapter 13, verses 2 through 8. So if you have a Chumash or any kind of Bible in front of you, we're in Leviticus chapter 13, verses 2 through 8. Okay. First, we're going to read through the verses, then I'm going to pause if anybody has any questions or comments, and then we'll go into the commentaries. So Leviticus chapter 13, verse 2. When a person has on the skin of his body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of his body, it shall be reported to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. First of all, that's redundant. Just pointing that out, right? There's no reason to say that if Aaron had sons, they were also priests, but, and we'll see that a little bit later in some of the commentaries, but it's very clear that you go to a priest, you go to the Kohen. Verse 3, the priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous affection. Just remember that leprosy is something that we ascribe to this. We don't know that it was actually leprosy. So tzara'at is, we'll just say it was a tzara'at affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce him unclean. So not only does he know what this thing is, but he has all of the power to say, you're unclean because you have this. So that would be like someone coming into a patient's room, a priest or a rabbi, an imam coming into a patient's room and saying, oh, you have this thing. So let me tell you all of the things that you can't do. Right? Well, someone of a spiritual standing doesn't necessarily know all the things that a person can't do based on a single diagnosis. What the priest is speaking to here is unclean, it says timeh here, but tameh, to be impure, meaning, to go back to the drash that I gave in Library Minyan years ago, that they are not prepared to give sacrifice. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, doesn't mean that they're gross, doesn't mean that they are bad people, just means they are not prepared to give a sacrifice in the temple. Now, why is that interesting to a priest? Because the priest oversees the temple. So to be able to come into the patient's room and say, you are tameh, you are unclean, what the priest is saying is you can't come to my factory, as it were, and participate in the goings on there. Okay. But if it is a white discoloration on the skin of his body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him, and if the affection has remained unchanged in color and the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him again. If the affection has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a rash. He shall wash his clothes, and he shall be clean. But if the rash should spread on the skin after he has presented himself to the priest and been pronounced clean, tahor is the word that we're using here, he shall present himself again to the priest. So if now he's ready to make sacrifices, then he has to present himself again to the priest because he's no longer tameh, now he is tahor. And if the priest sees that the rash has spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him tameh, unfit for sacrifice. It is sara'at. So I don't know about all of you, and in a second, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and I'll call on you to see if you have thoughts on this. I don't know about you, but this sounds like one of those commercials, that you see for medication on TV. And they say, well, if you have this, and if you have this, and if you have this, and if you have this. Like the Torah is telling us here what to look for. But we assume that this was not what Aaron knew this, right? It wasn't something that was being read. He wasn't hearing the commercial. He knew all of this, right? The doctors who are putting together that medication of the commercials that we hear know the information. That's why they can say it. So we are learning the information as the reader. And it gives us some amount of knowledge, right? If someone was standing in front of me and I could say, okay, so it's a white discoloration. I don't think it's deeper. Let me find Leviticus chapter 13, verse 4 and tell you what to do. I could figure out what the rules are, but Aaron is acting as a medical professional. He's acting as someone who knows, well, if it's skin deep, then you do this. If it's not skin deep, then you don't do that. If it looks like only a rash, you do this. And again, as a priest and in modern day as a rabbi, we don't have those skills. We don't know how to do those things. I mean, I know what a rash looks like, but not because I'm a doctor, because I know what a rash looks like. So how come all of a sudden the people have to go to the priest and ask what to do? Okay, I'm going to stop talking before we get to the commentators who are going to give us some of these answers and see if anybody has any thoughts, comments, counter sermons, criticisms, anything. No, nothing. Larry doesn't even have something? He's shaking his head. Oh, man. Okay, well, all right, we'll keep going. If you think, oh, Paula, I knew there had to be somebody.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I was thinking that later on in chapter 14, they go through the ritual and the person is outside of the community and then they move inside of the community after the ritual. And the ritual in a couple of the commentaries says it's reminiscent of what the priests, the rituals the priests went through to become priests. So when they graduated from priest school, right? So, and those rituals then brought them back into holiness, brought them to holiness. So I was thinking about, especially in our, COVID times, about bringing people back in and the process of what we need to do to bring back in, and how it's not just a psychological or a physical, but it's a spiritual practice too. So that's why I think, well, maybe not for my tzora'at, but for my soul, I might want to consult with.
Beautiful. So that's actually going to come up at the end of this teaching, that there was something about the need for people to go to someone who wasn't just telling them how they could infect another person or how they were infected themselves, but rather what it was doing to them as a part of a community, as a part of a spiritual practice. What was it doing to them? And that's where those words tameh and tahor are actually most interesting, because it doesn't say you're tameh, so now go away and never come back. It just says you're tameh, and so you can't come close right now. And Paula, it's interesting that you bring up COVID, because I hadn't yet thought about this, but the people who are bringing people back, right? The people who are saying, okay, now we have daily minion for 15, or now the hospitals can see people for not voluntary, what's the word? Unnecessary surgery. Can't think of the word. That those are people for whom, in the case of the hospital, it might be with doctors, right? It might be that the CEOs and the CFOs are consulting with the doctors. But in a synagogue, we have a medical task force, but ultimately it also comes down to, are we the rabbis ready? Stuart Tockner, who is probably watching, who's the president of our community, often when we are in these reopening meetings, we'll say, but how do the rabbis feel? Are the rabbis comfortable with that decision? And what you're pointing out, Paula, is that it's not just about, is it safe? But it's also about, are we spiritually ready? Are we spiritually ready to bring people back in? Are we spiritually ready to hold them in that way? And are they spiritually ready to be back with us? So that's fascinating. I hadn't thought about the reopening piece. Yes, Stan. Can Stan unmute?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It seems always been clear to me that the ancient people had no knowledge of infectious diseases.
Yeah.
And they pretty much thought that if you were sick, it was because of something you had done.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the role of the priest was not necessarily that of a medical doctor, but as somebody that could convince that person that he was now emotionally, spiritually okay, or cured in that manner. Mm-hmm. So they were not so much treating an affliction, but as a total picture, emotional as well as physical.
Beautiful. Keep that thought, because that's going to be kind of the closing piece here. And I think you're right. I think that they knew nothing of infectious disease, and the little that they knew, as you're pointing out, it wasn't just what happens to me medically, but what happens to all of me. How does this affect all of me? And that took the leader of the community, not a doctor, to help them try and figure out. Joanna.
So a little more on the how is this affecting all of me part of the question, as we've been talking now, I've been thinking about the way mikvah ritual has been redefined, and particularly there's a mikvah in Boston, Living Waters, that has done like some incredible work in that regard. Yeah. And people finding that they need ritual to get through different moments in life, different significant moments that previously hadn't been ascribed ritual to. And I wonder if there is wisdom in the Torah here that, in our immersion in sort of like the oozing and the grossness of it and whatever, we haven't paid so much attention to the fact that sometimes what appears to be just a physical thing has a spiritual component that needs a spiritual ritual of transition and transformation to pass through it.
Beautiful. And, at the beginning of this parsha, we hear all about the ritual of nidah, the ritual of a woman after her period going to a mikvah. We don't hear the halachot in the Torah, but that's where it comes from, of needing to count a certain number of days before she is tahor. And again, the way that unfortunately, we have thought of that practice is one that you're describing as, right, the oozing, the grossness, that part of what's happening to your body before you can go to mikvah, and then being able to come clean with that immersion. Now, when you talk to women who are practicing Hilchot Nida, or teaching Hilchot Nida, they very often will say exactly what you just said, which is that you need some kind of ritual container, some kind of spiritual container to feel as though that halakha that you are taking on to have separation from your spouse for a part of the month is contained, without being redundant, is contained in something that is spiritual, not just about your body, but also about rebirthing into something new and refinding yourself in all of those ways that the mikvah, as you're saying, especially at Living Waters in Boston, Mayim Chaim, has really taken on as a spiritual practice. So it's interesting that at the beginning of this parsha, we are talking about something that has taken on mikvah ritual. Here in this part of the parsha that we're looking at, we're not talking about something that's resolved, so to speak, by mikvah, but a very interesting way of thinking about that tameh and that tahor. Larry.
Yeah, I really didn't want to speak because I'm going to be speaking this afternoon, but you said something just now, and Dr. Rogoff in the Dvar Torah that's linked on the Shabbat bulletin talked about it as well. But you said something about it takes not only the doctors, but the priests who are basically dealing with social issues. And the link to today, that it takes not only the epidemiologists and the medical professionals to be able to convince people what to do, including how to reintegrate back into society. So many of us, people, are very concerned about what they can do now that they're vaccinated, now that numbers are down. It's more than the doctors that will convince us as a society that we can all re-engage, that we can re-engage with those who are infected, that those of us who are infected or maybe were never infected can re-engage. And I had never thought about that until you made that connection.
Well, thank you. Thank you for speaking up. And yes, Larry will be leading Mincha Mariv tonight and teaching. So you should all join him to hear what I'm sure will be an incredible teaching. So we're going to look at a few commentaries here. In true Rebecca Schatz form, I gave you many more than we're going to actually get to, but I do think it's an interesting topic, and I hope that you read some of them that we won't get to today. So Chizkuni has a very, I'll just read it without giving you a caveat. Okay. HaKohanim. Why the priests? The question that I asked at the beginning. HaKohanim. Excluding priests who have defiled themselves by committing certain sins deliberately so that they have lost their status permanently. So Chizkuni is saying, it says HaKohanim, but it doesn't mean all Kohanim. It just means the good Kohanim. So just stay with us for a second. That's not going to be his main answer. How do we know that all of the Israelites are included? From the words, from the words or one of, El Echad, which includes anyone who is a member of the Jewish people. If so, what is the point of the Torah having written from among his sons the priests? Remember I said when we read the verse, it's a little bit redundant. Like Aaron's a priest. We know his sons are also priests. It is to teach you that only the priests can give a ruling concerning ritual purity and ritual impurity. Not even the Supreme Court can do so. I'm just trying to see how he translates. Okay. Anyway, I'm interested to know how he translated Supreme Court. It doesn't say here. It says Chacham Shebei Yisrael. I don't think that is Supreme Court. But basically, it doesn't. Anyone who is higher up than the priests in terms of laws cannot even do this kind of ruling. Are then all priests experts by birth? The system works as follows. When the problem of Sara'at arises, someone who has studied the subject is consulted. So the priest goes to, let's call them a doctor. The priest accepts the superior knowledge of this expert and makes his ruling based on what he has been told by the expert who has examined the afflicted person. It is irrelevant whether the priest is truly familiar or not with the symptoms the Torah has taught us. It's quite interesting and a little bit disconcerting that it's irrelevant whether the priest knows all this information, because if the priest is making all these rulings, I, for one, would have wanted to make sure that it's actually extremely relevant whether or not the priest knows the ins and the outs of the symptoms of Surat. But the point that is being made that is probably even more important is that the priest was not doing this alone. So back to the point that Larry just echoed that I made earlier, there's no part of the priest's ruling that comes only from the priest. It comes from him learning from an expert. It comes from him knowing knowledge from previous experiences that, again, let's just call it a doctor, though who knows if that's how they were referred to in the times of the Torah, that a doctor would have then shared with the priest. The priest's ruling, just to go back to this very interesting sentence for a second, the priest's ruling is based only on the superior knowledge of the expert. So though not mentioned in the Torah's verses, it does seem that the priest is the mouthpiece for the expert. When Temple Beth Am gets an email from the clergy, or let's just say from Rabbi Kligfeld, it could be one person, about how we are reopening and the steps we're taking, Rabbi Kligfeld is a mouthpiece. He agrees with the decisions being made because he was part of them, but the medical team helped him make those decisions. So though we don't list everybody's name who's part of that team, similar to what the Torah is telling us here, Aaron is making these decisions based on knowledge that he's attained from these experts. And then he's the one who actually gives them. He's the one who actually meets with the people. Does everyone understand that? Everyone with me so far? Yeah? Okay. Any thoughts on that or comments that anyone wants to share? Did people assume that was the case? Yeah? I'm getting some nods. Okay. The Kliyakar, I don't know how many of you have either learned the Kliyakar or heard the Kliyakar referenced in commentaries on the Torah. The Kliyakar very often has almost midrashic ways of commenting on the Torah in a very flowery takes away the substance, but in a very beautiful and a very poetic almost way of understanding pieces of Torah, and this is no exception. The Kliyakar says, the person will be brought to Aaron the Kohen. His purification is only by means of a Kohen because Aaron's descendants have 3 good character traits that are the opposite of these. 1, the sin of Lashon Hara, right? Those of you who have heard the drash that Sara'at was inflicted because Lashon Hara, so if you spoke badly, you got Sara'at. There's a whole midrash on why. I'm not going to get into it right this second. The sin of Lashon Hara causes arguments and a separation between fellow men. Therefore, he is healed by Aharon, who exemplifies the trait of peace. For Aharon was Ohev Shalom Verodef Shalom, a lover of peace who pursued peace. Number 2, the sin of haughtiness of spirit is rectified by Aharon, who was extremely humble. As Chazal, as our sages said, what is written concerning Moshe and Aharon is even greater than that which is written concerning Avraham. Because by Avraham it says, I am dust and ashes, whereas by Moshe and Aaron it says, what are we? So just to explain that one out a little bit, for Adam claims what he is. Whereas Moshe and Aaron, the Kliyakar is saying, were so humble that they didn't even know how to compare themselves to something else that might make them seem great, might make them seem better than they potentially knew themselves to be. So Adam says, I am dust and ashes, and Aaron says, what are we? Also, Aharon did not have the negative character trait of lust for money, since the Kohanim did not have an inheritance in the land and only had what they were given from Hashem's table, the way in which they would receive money from the Beit HaMikdash. Therefore, they perfected the trait of being satisfied with little and were not at all close to the trait of miserliness, in which one's entire goal is to amass huge sums of money. So, though not all three of these, if you were to read them on their own, would you think, oh, it's Sarat? But what the Kli Yakar is doing is saying Aharon was not only the person who was allowed to do this because he was a priest and because he was someone who had this knowledge, but because he embodied these three traits that were necessary for a person who was being given, let's call it a diagnosis, needed those elements of character to be part of how that person was held, which is such a beautiful spiritual way of thinking about what the priest actually did in that moment. It wasn't just saying, you have a thing, you have to stay home. You have a rash, you have to wash your clothes. There was pastoral counseling around what was happening, and why was Aaron allowed to do that? Because he embodied these three traits. And I love that. I love thinking that people don't just come into being able to support someone because they learned how to be pastors or they learned how to be chaplains, but there's some element of needing your personality to also be one that connects with the person who you're pastoring, who you're working with. I'll just give a very quick example. My aunt is a doctor at UCLA. She works in internal medicine, and she came to the bedside of someone who she was a doctor, but not their doctor at the hospital. And the person then relayed back to our family that she was the most important doctor on this person's team. Why was she the most important doctor? She didn't do anything. She didn't even prescribe. She didn't even prescribe Benadryl, right? She didn't do anything for this person's overall medical wellness. But her bedside manner was something that person needed. And the person never forgot that. They never forgot that, sure, she had the knowledge. Sure, she had the insight to be able to help. But overall, it was the fact that she could hold this patient, that she could be there for this patient and take care of her. And that's what the Kli Yakar is saying that Aharon did. Okay. Excuse me. So we're going to read one more commentary. And this actually comes from, actually two more, sorry. We're going to read two more. We're going to read like a half of two. So I guess together, that's one. At the end of the Siftei Chachamim on your sheet here, I'm going to just read the last little bit. So this is on, again, of his sons, the Kohanim, to teach that although the Kohen does not know the signs of impurity and needs to show them to a Torah scholar who may not be a Kohen, nevertheless, the Torah scholar is not allowed to say, this is a sign of impurity or this is a sign of purity. Rather, he must teach the Kohen the laws of impurity and purity, so that the Kohen will tell the person who has the skin eruption, you are pure or impure. So not only are there other people who have this knowledge, but what the Siftei Chachamim is saying is that it's important for the Kohen to have the knowledge, because if the Kohen is going to say something that impacts their life, it needs to be true, right? We were talking about this in the Parsha class yesterday. It's important that if a rabbi is asked a question and they don't know the answer, that they say, I don't know, as opposed to giving an answer. Same with a doctor, obviously. Same with a lawyer. Same with any profession. It's important that if you don't know something, the words that you're about to say are going to make a difference, that you actually know what the answer is, or you say, I don't know. Because what you say could impact the person's life. And the Kohen, in this particular example, if the Kohen doesn't know, the Kohen's going to say, you're tahor and able to come and sacrifice, and you're tameh and you can't come and sacrifice, what if they're the opposite? What if they shouldn't be sacrificing and the other person should be sacrificing? Okay. So now, the last little piece here at the end. This is actually from the Eitz Chaim. So if you're in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, I don't know exactly where it is or what page it's on because I don't have it open, but it's in there somewhere, if that's helpful. In biblical Israel, the Kohen was both the religious and the medical authority. The biblical mind saw the connection between the physical and the spiritual dimensions of illness and recovery, perhaps more clearly than we see it today. So that goes back to Stan's comment as well, that it's possible that these people existed, but the fact that the person, the Kohen in this case, who is giving the advice, is both the physical and the spiritual of the person, knows how to then regard them in their moment of sara'at, whether or not they should be coming close or whether they should be staying away. And that's both spiritual and physical. When someone is in grief during COVID, it is very hard to not give them a hug because we know to stay away, but we also know that that hug would spiritually give them support. So what do? Do you give them a hug or do you not give them a hug? And that's where this physical and spiritual piece comes together, and where the priest, and in modern day, the rabbi, can decide what's the right move to make. Do I keep my distance because I believe that's safest? Or do I give them a hug because I know that that's what's going to spiritually fulfill them? When the priest sees it, Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk says, the word vera'ahu in verse 3 means that the Kohen is to appreciate the wholeness of the person in front of him, seeing more than just the diseased part of the body. He is to see what is whole and healthy about the person, not only what is afflicted. Before seeing what is impure, the Kohen must acknowledge what is holy in the individual before him. I would say that this isn't just about a person. It's also about a community. It's about a situation. It's about being able to know what is holy, what is needed in that moment, and not just what is it that we need to be doing because we think it is safest. That's important. That's why you're not all in this room, because we know for your spiritual wellness you would be in this room. But we know to keep a distance because that's what's most healthy. But the fact that you're on this screen is because we also know about your spiritual wellness. Because you are in this room. You're just not physically in this room. So this piece here has convinced me this Shabbat that it makes all kinds of sense that it was the priest who these people went to when they had this unknown this unknown disease, this unknown thing that was keeping them separated from that which they knew in their community. Because the priest was the only one who could understand how to hold these people as holy beings, no matter what their skin looked like, no matter what their house looked like, no matter how many clothes they had to throw away, knew that they were holy beings, and to hold them and to make sure that they felt supported in every step of the way of this sara'at. So what I hope you take from this, this Shabbat, is that we are still in this era of being your spiritual leaders and needing those medical professionals to help us understand how to come back together. But what I hope you know is that any time that we are making a decision, anytime that we are thinking about what to do in this physical space, or around a funeral, or around a shiva, or around a baby naming, that yes, we are doing it with our medical task force behind us and with health in mind, and The reason that your rabbis are involved in that decision is because we also want to make sure that your spiritual souls are also in mind. So I hope that you are able to hold on to this. I hope that you're able to continue joining us in all the ways that we are step by step coming back together. And I hope that you are able to be for other people the priest in their lives, to be able to see them for the holiness that they are, to be able to keep your distance when that's the safest move, and to also know, as Larry reminded us, that when it is safe to be close, that we take those steps, because that will be important for the reemergence and for the rebirth, really, of each of our souls, being able to come back together and make sure that our souls have been held and have been whole throughout this entire experience. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to conclude with Ein Eloheinu Aleinu and Mourner's Kaddish. Please do the Musaf Amidah on your own. I just don't want to take the time for us to do it now since it's already noon. But it can be found on page 185 or 156 or 430 when you go to do it after we finish here. Ein Eloheinu is on page 204 or 182 or 508. Enke Eloheinu, Enke Adonenu, Enke Malkeinu, Enke Moshienu, Miche Eloheinu, Miche Adonenu, Miche Malkeinu, Miche Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shiktiru, Avotenu, Lefanecha Ketoret Hasamim, Yanai, Nai, 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 Yanai, 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 Nai, 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 Yanai, Nai, Nai, Nai. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet kedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoy ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchakenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, vanachnu korim, umishachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, shehu noteh shamayim v'yaseh haaretz, v'moshe v'ikar rabba shamayim. Kakatu b'toratecha Adonai lach le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Mourner's Kaddish, page 207, page 184, or page 512. And I just want to say to Helen that we are standing here with you as you recite Kaddish very early on in this process of you reciting Kaddish. And that when I saw you come on the screen, it was very sad to not see Marty sitting next to you on that couch. Because we spent a lot of time with the two of you at the beginning of this pandemic specifically, seeing the two of you on that couch and seeing the two of you join us for services. And so as we see you alone, I just want you to know that we're thinking of you. I am thinking of you even more deeply, and that these words of Mourner's Kaddish ring even truer, being able to imagine him sitting next to you on that couch. Page 207, 184, or 512. Yit gadal ve'yit kadash shemei Rabbi, be'alma divra chirutei ve'amlich malchutei, bechayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Israel, ba'agala uvizman kariv ve'imru amen, yehei shmei Rabbi mevarach le'olam l'omei almaya, Yit barach ve'yishtabach ve'yit pa'ar ve'yit ramam ve'yit naseh V'yit hadar, v'yit ale, v'yit halal, shemei dekudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. I'm going to go get Kiddush. If you would like to follow along, it's on page 77 or page 315 or page 734. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael tashabalet, sotet tashabalet dorotam berito lam, b'ni uvim v'nei Yisrael tilelam, ki sheshit yamim as Adonai tashamayim v'ta'aretz, uvayom hashvihi shavav v'yinafash, zachor et yom hashabat lekodsho, sheshit yamim tavo v'sita kom lechtecha, v'yom hashvihi shabat l'Adonai Elohecha, lo taseh chom lecha, ata uvincha uvitecha avdecha ve'amtcha uvemtecha v'gercha asher bisharecha, ki sheshit yamim as Adonai tashamayim v'ta'aretz, et hayam v'kosher v'yanach v'yom Hashvi, Hakem Barach Adonai Yom Shabbat V'Kadshehu Savri, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Borei Peri Agafen. Yasher Koach again to Jennifer Lowe on her anniversary of her bat mitzvah and leading with me. Tonight, Mincha is at 7:10, again with Larry Herman. Joanna will be reading Torah for us, so you can come and see a lovely duo. They are leading for us because Cantor Chorney and I will be here in the sanctuary doing a bat mitzvah at 6:45. And again, please make sure that you look out for an email about Judy Weinstock's funeral that you can, I'm assuming, watch on Zoom, and for all of the notices about Shiva in the coming week for all those who have passed in this past week. On Sunday at 5 p.m., there is a community Shiva without minyan. So it'll just be a place to hold space, to share stories. Rabbi Kligfeld and I will be leading for Lou Miller. So again, 5 p.m., the link went out with his condolence letter. So if you need that, you can go back to that email, or I'm sure email one of us and we can send it to you. Have a Shabbat Shalom. And may next week be a week of only happy things. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.